everyone. Thank you for being here. I am going to do something a bit different for this. First of all, it is not live, which I know is really different for a lot of you, but there's a point behind that because I'm talking to a person who also knows some very important people. So we wanted to be sure that everybody was protected and no crazy things got out too soon, so to speak. That being said, if you came over here from TikTok, you will have seen the reenactment skit that I did with Molly, where she was talking with a dear friend of mine, Kristina, about Kristina's work and what she does. And not only was that of interest to Molly, it just so happens that Kristina made a short film called Casa, which is about spirits. We had a really great conversation about that over coffee. And honestly, as far as spiritual representation goes, my mind was blown. It's not a horror film. It's very just fantastic, and I want everybody to watch it. And I figured, hey, if we can talk more about that, talk more about the process, talk more about Kristina, about intimacy coordination, I figured why not go and start. So Kristina, please introduce yourself.
Rebekah, that was so sweet. What a nice intro. Hi, everybody. I'm Kristina Arjona. I have known Rebekah like over 10 years now. 14. Oh my God, it's been a long time since we were in college. So yeah, I wear a lot of hats, and I have a very unique job as an intimacy coordinator for film and TV. And I also direct, and yeah, Mi Casa is a film I'm really passionate about, and HBO bought it, and so you can watch it on HBO anytime, which is kind of crazy. And yeah, and I got to hang out with Rebekah and meet a friend of hers.
Yeah, that was not planned because I didn't know that's the thing. What I love is I have like this world of people who I know or who have known me through like haunted stuff, and then like there's literally the rest of my life leading up until I was like 25. So whenever like you and other people who I went to school with or like I worked with in theater, whenever they follow me and even like generally know what in the world I am a content creator for, I'm always just like, well, cool, thanks. Yeah, well, this is the place. Like I actually do go here for coffee. It is enjoyable. Very cool. So, yeah, as you mentioned, we know each other through college.
Oh, yeah.
I remember, let's see, you were teamed up as my mentor of my freshman year. And I remember a funny story that you said where you apparently had seen my profile picture. You had been messaging me on Facebook, but then you showed my profile picture to like other people who were already in the program, and they thought that I looked just like this other person that apparently was nothing like me. Do you remember this? I don't know who the person was, but they were just like, oh, she looks like so-and-so. Does she act like so-and-so? And you defended me. You defended my honor. You were like, no, she's nothing like that person.
Oh my God, I can't even remember who that was now. That's so funny.
It's probably better. That was a long time ago. So yeah, you were my mentor in college, and just going like kind of getting away from college and how you graduated and your company. I suppose we should start with your company, how you got into directing, which I know was in and out of your company, and then how you fell into what you are doing now. So please enlighten us.
Yeah, so I obviously went to school for theater. I double majored in acting and theatrical design and production, so I did a lot of directing. Actually, that year they decided to not let people double major in that anymore because it was so difficult. So like me and Steph, this one other girl did it. We're like, we're the last ones, and it sucked, but we did it.
You did so well. I don't know how you did it because it was a lot of work.
It was a lot. But I accomplished that. And then I got a little burnt out from theater after that. And I kind of transitioned into film. And I moved to Atlanta and got started there. And it was a really accessible market for me. I managed to get an agent pretty quickly, which was great as an actor. And then I was getting kind of disappointed for the kind of content that was being made, the auditions I was getting for a woman in her 20s. So I started creating my own content, and then I just started creating my own company, which is Jump Cut Collective. And so we just started making our own stuff that showed women, what you would say is like women doing things besides getting a man. So it was literally anything else. So we did like comedies and dramas and like time travel and all these different things, and just mixing up what the content was. And then also for me as a queer Latina woman to have more representation in both of those elements. And that's just something that I was really passionate about. And I continued working as an actor, and then I moved into like AD, assistant directing work in bigger productions. So I got on bigger sets, which was really great in Atlanta, and had some experiences. And then I went into some experiences both as an actor and as an AD with dealing with intimacy that were not handled very well, specifically with sexual violence. And so kind of on the other side of that, I took the skills that I had both as an actor and both on the production side and developed some safety protocols on how to handle that kind of content. Unfortunately, at the time, people didn't care as much. Like I would do panels, I would offer things for free, and I'm like, please, somebody care. And it was very slow going. But then Me Too happened. And then people suddenly decided, oh, maybe we should care about how we're treating these actors. So that was a really positive thing that came out of that movement, is the introduction of intimacy coordinators in film. So it was something I was really passionate about that I just kind of thought was a side thing for me that I just cared about. And it suddenly became a profession that I could actually move into. And it sort of felt like all the skills I had learned came together for this job that I absolutely adore. And I was lucky enough to be selected for a training program in LA called Intimacy Professionals Association. And at the time, they only took like 12 people a year. So I felt very special. And went through their 6-month training and then got accepted by their agency. And I've been kind of working like crazy ever since.
That is fantastic. And I remember when you got into that program, like you talked about it, and then you talked about when you graduated and you showed your class, and I was just like, oh, this is exciting. And then really it was just like work, which was, I'm going to real quick paint a picture for anybody out there who has never been either in a theater scene with sexual content or mature content or a film scene. So my more recent experience on the small screen with that was, there was no coordinator. This is before Me Too. This is pre-pandemic. And I was having a sex scene with an older man who was like the sweetest man. He was so consensual. Like he always asked me, he's like, is it okay if I put my hand there? Even when the director was like, hey, put your hand there. And he would just be like, is this all right with you? And I was like, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Though during the scene, it was the most weird thing, because basically I was playing his daughter, he was playing my father, and it was a lot of mature content there. It was one of those crime shows.
Okay.
And it was, yeah, I know you're cringing now, because basically they set up all the lighting. I am brought in. He's already like laying down on the bed, and they're like, okay, lay down on the bed. We had not talked about anything. Like, we read the script, whatever. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, laying down. And poor thing, he was so uncomfortable because he respected me so much. And he was just like, I don't want to do anything that makes you uncomfortable. And I was like, thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm like laying down on the bed. They're already starting to roll the film. And then right before action happens, the director says, oh, Rebekah, are you at least 18? I said, yeah.
Checked this beforehand.
Yep, already in makeup, costume, everything, rolling film, like. So I said, yeah. And then basically, because they weren't using a lot of audio in the takes, he would just say to do things. And so it was like, all right, like unzip and, like touch her there and that kind of thing. And it was just like, and fortunately, it wasn't even as far as it could have gone. It wasn't as touchy as it could have been. It wasn't as revealing as it could have been. And that's why I paint this picture for anybody who's unfamiliar with that. It's when you don't have somebody to work the connecting points between what are you wearing, how are you moving, the language that people speak with you, like how they talk to you, how old you are. There's so much that goes into it that was just left outside of what was required for most of film history. And now they have people like you, and I'm so grateful.
Yeah. Oh God, I'm so sorry you had to go through that, but it is like wonderful that you had an actor with you that was caring. And again, like as an actor, I've had experiences where I've had wonderful actors that I worked with, and then I've had experiences with not so great actors. And so you can't expect the actors to be the ones, protecting you in this scene. So everything he was doing with the check-ins is like fantastic. But yeah, like what you're saying, actually, as of 2020, there are new rules for SAG, which is Screen Actors Guild. It's the union for actors. So we make sure that any production that has SAG actors is up to this level of safety. And so the new rules as of 2020 are these things like there's a 48-hour rule. So you have to give a writer to your actors that details any kind of simulated sex elements, any kind of nudity, and they have to sign off on it, but they will get it at least 48 hours before you're filming this. And then you can't add anything. You can take stuff away, but you can't add anything. So there's nothing on the day going, okay, we're going to add this thing or we're going to do this. Because then you can say, oh, I'm so sorry, SAG won't let me. So even these shifts are happening. And then same thing, like part of my job is, I describe it like I'm like a stunt coordinator for intimate scenes. So like I will come in, talk to the director, see what they're visioning for these different scenes. And then I will meet individually with the actors involved, usually over Zoom because that's how life is now. But I talk to them individually about what's expected in the scene, what they're thinking, how they're feeling, if there's elements that they want to change or figure out a different compromise on, or, I can get a gauge pretty quickly if they're like enthusiastically like, yeah, I'm cool with this. Or if they're like, wow, okay, yeah, I guess, okay, I can do that. And so my goal is to help them feel really comfortable with the situation and to deal with things ahead of time. So if they've decided I'm not comfortable with this element or I don't want to do nudity here and all that they feel like they can talk to somebody who's outside of the normal power dynamic to come up with a different option, and that they understand that they can always reverse their consent. So even if they say, yeah, I want to do this thing, or I've signed my writer, I show up on the day, and actually I don't feel comfortable with this and I want to walk it back, they can still do that. And so helping them be empowered to know what their rights are so that everybody can go through this scene feeling confident, that I can help them stage simulated elements so that it looks real for camera, but that everybody's safe, that we've got barriers and all of these modesty garments in place. That's a big part of it. And so people always laugh. We're like, what is in your kit? Like I have a bunch of crazy stuff in my kit. But yeah, so that's just a big part of like making sure everybody can go home feeling safe and feeling empowered by what we're doing, and that we're furthering a story without taking advantage of anybody in the process.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned your kit. I remember even when you were talking about how you just have mints in your kit because you're in each other's faces or the actors are. So
girl, I have like mints, mouthwash, breath, like gum, like every type, Listerine strips, like whatever their flavor is. Like I usually will ask people too, I'm like, what do you, because some people have like strong sense. They're like, if this person has wintergreen in my face, I will lose it. So it's like, so you have to be aware of what scents people are against or like. And so, yeah, that's part of the prep process is like, what do you want on standby? What do you not want your partner to have? And certain things, especially like if I have an actor that smokes, like usually the other actor will be like, can we make sure that they have gum before the scene? Like different things just to be caring of the individuals in the scene.
Mm-hmm. And, for anybody watching and they're like, oh, that's a little consideration, though it is nice. I'll say I've been in scenes with people where their breath was so bad that I had to hold my breath in between takes. It goes a long way when you don't feel like you're about to pass out, and then at the end of the scene you like run out to your dressing room or your trailer and you're just like so it makes a big deal.
I think it helps with your acting too. If you're having to be close and intimate with someone and you're physically trying to like resist the breath, then yeah, that's already a bad place to start from.
It's like extra acting, like you can't even be human. And with that note too, it matters so much. You hear about before there were safety precautions, especially like in the 50s and before, with performers, some of them just really losing their minds going through some of these shoots. Like I think of stuff with Alfred Hitchcock, for example. You have all of these stories And, to somebody who's simply viewing it on a movie, on a TV or something like that, they could say, oh, yeah, I could see how that role might have messed them up. Here's the thing, no role should ever mess somebody up so long as they're being honest with themselves and they feel safe. And this is just another level of that safety. So all performers, they can keep coming back day after day and simply do their job and not feel like they're being taken advantage of in any way.
Yeah, you see that a lot, especially with Alfred Hitchcock. A lot of these like horror films, but then a lot of other films as well. So there's stuff with like The Shining and how she was treated in that process. And it's this idea of directors not telling an actor what's going on or choosing to terrorize them as a person to get a performance. And then you have actresses in particular who leave the business altogether and deal with mental health issues because of that mistreatment, because it's this idea of, oh, it was for the film, but I am physically assaulting this person. I am taking advantage of them, or I am tricking them into a traumatic experience for the sake of a film, but it's still happening to their body. And so it's also like a legal gray area of, what's going on. And then it gives, especially at that time, gave a lot of actresses a limited voice, and it just kind of ruined their careers. So yeah, it's about respecting the actors to act and like giving them the space that you hired them to do this job, so let them do their job and don't trick people into doing things. I know there are some actors that like, okay, I want an element of surprise in certain pieces, but that's still like talked about and clarified, and understanding different people have different methods of acting, but like in the same way that if you had a fight scene, you wouldn't just be like, I just want to feel it out. Like, however I want to punch this guy in the face, like, this is my method. No stunt coordinator is gonna be like, yeah, that's cool. Let's just do that. It's like there are safety elements in place. I understand what your process is, but we have to follow these safety elements to tell the best story and make sure that everyone can be safe in the process. So it's not just the physical, wounds or issues that you could get from a stunt. This is also an emotional element to it. So there's added care that needs to be in place for these scenes, even in consensual scenes. And so like understanding even more so in non-consensual scenes, but like how to work together. Non-consensual scenes require the most consent. And so that's like talking that through and making sure that I'm the one that sort of like will talk through everything that could be awkward, and I'm going to talk about it. And once we've talked about it, it helps. It leaves things not in the gray area, or I was too nervous to say this thing, or that I'm uncomfortable about this. I'm like, I'm just going to ask you, in a private and respectful way, but we're going to figure this out so that you have full consent in everything we're doing.
Absolutely. And I think about choreography pieces, like traditional dance pieces. For the ones that move me the most, there is a flow. It might be a staccato flow, especially if you're meant to feel a particular emotion or see a particular scene. Though those scenes, once again, are choreographed out to the performers. Even if there are some spots where they could do some improv, they have that trust maintained. Otherwise, somebody gets hurt on stage or wherever you have it. So it makes total sense to me. And it once again comes back to the whole concept of let the performers perform. You're hiring them to do the thing. And it's so easy to find the right people nowadays because we have the internet. So the people can do the thing that they're hard to do.
Yep.
I did want to ask, because we met up in Wilmington, and I know pre-pandemic, so much was going on in Atlanta. And basically, when everything started to happen again, a lot of that work, or at least a significant portion of that work, came back to Wilmington, which was super exciting to us because before Atlanta, we were the Hollywood of the East. And then legislation happened, and I don't blame them for going to Atlanta at the time. But now other legislation is happening, and now they're all coming back. We're not as bad as anyway.
There's all levels of things that are bad, but
yeah. So I'm curious, just with all of that happening again, and you having regular work kind of all over the place, what is it like working in Wilmington compared to these other places you've been to?
I'm originally a North Carolina girl, and went to Elon, everything. I have family in Wilmington, and that's kind of how I ended up in that market. Like the first time I was ever on a major production was in Wilmington. I was like in college. I spent a summer like backgrounding on Eastbound and Down. Like that was my start. And it was a ton of fun. And I just made some friends there that I've connected with and stayed with over the years. And that kind of, those connections from 10 years ago connected for me when I got my certification for intimacy coordinating, and I had posted about it, and I had some friends in Wilmington saying like, oh, that's so great that you're doing that. I've got a show that needs this. And that kind of got me started. And then I spend a lot of my time in Wilmington, and I love it. I mean, honestly, Wilmington is my favorite place to film. And not only just for the beach, my dog is very happy every time that we go. It has a very different temperament than any other places. I was talking to you about this, that like the local crews are so lovely and welcoming. I don't know if it's the beach vibe, something about it is just like a little less tense. And then sometimes in Atlanta, there's some pressure or some power dynamics between like LA and New York and the Atlanta crews that I don't see as much in Wilmington, kind of on both ends. And so I think both New York and LA are like happy to be there. You know, like those crews are like happy to be on the beach, happy to be in this space. And I see them working really cohesively together. So my days are much more enjoyable. Like, you know, I don't love working in Atlanta. I still live here, but it's anytime I get gigs in Wilmington, I'm already happy. I know it's going to be a really lovely experience. And there's just a lot more support, it feels like, in the community and with the productions coming, the different people coming together. So I'm really happy to see that Wilmington is booming as much as it is. And I'm hopefully trying to split my time. I'm shifting. We'll see. I'm shifting around. I'm just like accepting what life is giving me of Wilmington. But yeah, I'm, you know, so in love with the shows and the features I've gotten to work there.
Yeah. And what you're talking about, that kind of vibe, is what I talk about loving here as well. Because I just really moved here on a whim. There was no reason for me to come here, at least no reason that I saw at the time. We can call it fate, destiny, whatever. But I just moved here because it was like, I need to do something different. And what you're talking about is what I hear from theater professionals as well as film professionals when they come out here. It's why I know a bunch of people who they moved out here in the late 80s throughout the 90s from LA because they were like, you know what? I could save money. My kids could have a safer school comparatively. I don't know if that's still the case anymore, but here we are. I really don't know. But they came out here, and even when the film industry moved primarily to Atlanta, a lot of them were like, you know, we just like it here. We will commute to Atlanta, and if that means less work, but it means we can still have cheaper accommodations and still be comfortable, we'll do that. It is a wild thing. Like I have this old haunt of a bar that I go to, and or at least I did pre-pandemic, not so much recently, but it's just a bunch of performers. A lot of them, you know, came here in the 80s and 90s, and they all just talk about what they do. And you can just sit there for like 5 hours and just hear these tales of this director and that actor and this and that. And I'm just like, and all of you are just here. You just decided to be here. And they're like, yeah, 30 years sure does go by quickly. I'm like, I guess so.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It goes fast. I mean, like for me, like 10 years in the industry, I'm like, whew, it feels long and short at the same time.
For sure. Yeah, we're just, I feel like we're both just starting life. Like we figured it out and we're like here now. And we're like, oh, now we can do the thing that we wanted to do. We just didn't know how we wanted to do it 10 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, like literally the thing I wanted to do didn't exist 10 years ago. So it's like never something that I could have thought of like growing up wanting to do, you know, because that's the question I get. Oh my God, leaf blowers outside. I hope that's not too loud. But the question I get the most is like, how did you get into this? And like, is this something you wanted to be when you were little? And I'm like, no, I mean, not directly, but I was always passionate about telling stories, and I was really passionate about wherever I fit. So sometimes it was in front of the screen or on stage, and sometimes it was behind the scenes. And I'm just really passionate about sharing humanity and making sure everybody's safe in the process. And so once this became an option, that was like, oh, this is it. And it just lit my soul up. Like, it was just, you know, you've seen me, that like, this is something that brings me so much joy to be able to do, to be able to talk about. Like, it's so exciting to get to talk to your audience. I know this is like a totally different thing for them to hear about. So I hope you all are enjoying this unique conversation. But I just like to sing it, you know, from the mountaintops of like how this industry is changing and like how positive it is for everyone involved, and that we can do better and that we're working towards that right now.
And you talk about, you know, talking to my audience, that kind of thing. One of the things that I do go over a lot with people is how to avoid ghost stories, so to speak. And that, I believe, is through mental health practices. It's through feeling like you're in the present. It's to live life for the now so that you don't get to the other side and you're like, wait, I didn't get to. So this kind of thing, when we're talking about consent and standing in your own power, though, when we're also talking about follow your dream, you may not know what your dream is until, you know, 10, 15 years down the line. Though, if you keep being true to yourself and following your passion, even when it's hard, even when you don't know what's next, even when a pandemic happens, if you keep true to that and you know that it's like just true for you and it's resounding and it's resilient in its own way, that is a spiritual practice in itself. So really, just tying all this back, I consider it still within the umbrella of spiritual experience, because anybody who's aligned with their passion, I believe that is a spiritual experience, even if it's just with oneself. So
Yeah, no, I love that. You know, speaking like the spiritual element of it too, because pre-pandemic, I was trying to get certified for like 2 years after it had been a thing, but I'm living in Atlanta. There was no certification process here. There's one in LA, New York, and I was in coordinating with them to try and get up a Zoom training, which at the time was crazy. And so like getting that scheduled just like took so long. And then during the pandemic was the first time that the other place that I wanted to train with offered up an online course. So suddenly I was up against people from all over the world to get a spot, but which ended up being really lovely. And I had people in my class from Germany and New Zealand and all over. So that was really lovely. But it finally made it accessible for me. Whereas before I got into that, during COVID, again, like everybody else in the performing world, I lost all my jobs for the year. I was literally actually went to Wilmington to stay with my grandma because she was, you know, on her own during that time. My aunt works actually at the hospital in Wilmington and they couldn't be together. So I was like, well, I got nothing else going on. Let's hang out, you know? And that was, we kept each other company. And I was like, maybe I'm going to go into social work. Like, I just need to do something that like heals my heart. And I want to do intimacy coordinating. It feels like it's not possible. Like, and I just kind of put out the energy of like, I want to do something bigger. What is it? And that's when I found out about they're doing their online option for this training program. And then everything just started to fall in place. So my grandmother's very like spiritual with me. And she was like, I saw your Lolo, and this, like, I knew this was coming. And so kind of putting that energy out spiritually of like, yeah, like you think you are this thing. I think I'm an actor. I think I'm a director, you know, like all of these things. And I'm like, well, what's the essence of it? If I'm not this job, who am I? And it felt scary to walk away from that identity that I've been in for 15 years. But then it became freeing to be like, oh, this other thing fits me too. It's the same core mission statements. It's the same thing I'm passionate about, but it's in a field where honestly, I'm much more empowered. And like, I am in rooms with showrunners and big directors and big actors, and I'm treated with respect in a way that I never was as a day player, you know, as an actor. And so now I know when I get in those rooms, when I've got a scene between a series regular and a day player, which is like a lead of a show, and then someone who comes on for a day or two just for a sexual scene, I know what it's like to be that person that's like, I'm new, I don't know anybody, I'm scared, and I have to do an intimacy scene. Like the power dynamics are crazy off the charts. So I know how to support that person and help them feel as comfortable as the star. And that's something that I'm so passionate about. I'm so passionate about working with young people and with people who are my day players, like from Atlanta, from Wilmington, my locals, that I'm like, I am here for you, baby. Let's do this safely. And it's just, yeah, I think spiritually was something that I really was in search of and then found it. And it happened fast. Like you're saying, I got certified and then literally I came back and 2 days later, they were like, hey, there's this feature in Atlanta that doesn't have an intimacy coordinator and they need one tomorrow. Can you come in? And I was like, well, here we go. So it was kind of like that ever since, that there was a big need for it. And, kind of when they say when people like make it overnight, you're like, yeah, but they also worked at it for 10 years, So for me, I got this certification, but because of the work I'd been doing, because of the people I had been connecting with for 10 years, suddenly they were like, oh, you're local and you're certified. Now I can bring you in, and the LA people or the New York people will respect that as a person. And so it was a lot of hard work that puts, because I get people out there like, oh my God, this sounds great, I want to do it. And I just want to understand, like, if you haven't been in the industry, like, it does take time in the same way any other profession would, of building up the rapport, understanding how the sets work and all of that. But, it is a really awesome job if you take the time to do all of that.
Yeah. Woo! I hear what you are saying with the whole, your life set up and then things change and then you're like, oh wait, I was meant to do this. So that resonates.
Or you found your own path. That's right.
Woo! The other thing, I thought it was 12 people in the States. You mentioned 12 people in the world for that class, and I'm just like, I know you. That is just so. I'm even like more excited about you, and even though I know what you're doing and everything, I was just like, yay!
Yeah, it was very validating, because I think at the time, and there's a discussion about like accessibility of intimacy coordinating, and understanding like at that time too of like, we are ambassadors of this job, and making sure that everyone feels comfortable. Like if you get on a shoot, I was on with a bigger star one time, and he was like, I had a really negative experience with an intimacy coordinator. It made me really uncomfortable, and now I don't, so I had to kind of work through that with him. So anytime somebody kind of is rushing in and saying they're an intimacy coordinator, if they haven't done the training, the same way that a stunt coordinator coming in saying, I'm a stunt coordinator, and they haven't done the proper training, like you can really hurt the whole industry. And again, there's like, my program does a really great accessibility as far as like scholarship options. Like there are things that you can do if you're passionate about it to kind of eliminate some of that gatekeeping. But I do think that there needs to be the respect for it, and for people who are passionate to say, hey, I'm an intimacy coordinator in training, and just be honest of where you are. And there's, ways that you can start, and there's individual seminars you can take if you're not like in a full program. But yeah, it was very flattering to be like seen in such a positive way. And and when my agent was saying that I was like one of their top, like I was their top earner like last year, of just like job to job to job, for between her getting me interviews and me getting connections and stuff, like I was just I was all over the place. And I told you I was in Korea this year for a couple months and on a Netflix show, and it was just like, it's been great. It's been like a whirlwind. But yeah, it's a lot of work that got me to be seen by this program, because I was so passionate for so many years. And then the continue, I'm constantly doing new trainings and learning, and I want to be the best I can be for all of my performers and my teams and everything as this profession kind of continues to develop.
For sure. Wow. We have talked about various stories from the industry, and I want to start bridging that into the spiritual, just for the folks who are like, yeah, but ghosts. So, one of the things I want to ask you about were, have you had any kinds of haunted experiences on set or anything like that before?
Yes. I worked on a horror film as an AD, so assistant director, that was in an abandoned schoolhouse, like a abandoned like 2-story building, and it was all night shoots like in October. And eventually, like, I'm like, this is going to be something that I like, make my own movie about, just the behind the scenes of this, because like literally on Halloween night, we were like cutting somebody's neck open, like all of this stuff in this, it was just a very intense teen, horror film thing. And it was literally like wherever we would go, we're like, I need everybody, I'm going to stay with you. We're going to stay here. There were parts of the building that we just didn't go to. There was at one point like a small doll that was found, and they were like, we're going to put it in the movie. And we're like, don't touch it, leave it be. Like, and then one time there was like a cat that appeared that had no back legs and was just like dragging itself through. And then it just like was gone. And we're like, cool. So we probably shouldn't be here. And so that was probably the most stressful production I had worked on. I was like, that was my first and last horror. Like, I did it, and I'm never going to do this again. But I am going to write a story about a bunch of crew members who die making a horror film, because that feels right. And so that was a stressful one. On a more positive note, so for filming for Mi Casa, so the short that I did that HBO bought, so we have a Ouija board involved, and we have opinions about Ouija boards, and but I wanted to be very respectful of how it was used throughout the process, and we ended up having one that was like handmade, and I did not want it in my house, so the actors were the ones that kept it like prior to filming. I was just like, I'm very much like, I've had some experiences in my own life, and I tend to just want to be like respectful of energy. I'm not here to like mess with anything. I don't want to disrespect anybody. So we were very keen that it didn't come out unless it was needed, and that through the process, like in the film, it's used genuinely. Like, it's kind of this joke that the guy like picks it up from Target, and then it actually like works, and he's like, oh my God, I can't believe that this works, in connection. And so it was interesting to take it into a space that was an old space. So it was this, it's now a church, but it used to be owned. It's literally owned by like old white people in Atlanta. And the room we were in is called the Stone Mountain Room. And literally the building was built with stone from Stone Mountain. So there's a lot of energy, and it's the original paintings and all this stuff. And so it was interesting to talk to the people that work at the church there, because they, so it's sort of like a back part, like the house is now like their kind of their offices, and they do different programs and stuff there. And then the front part is the church. And right outside the window of where we were filming actually is an area that they housed homeless people. And so they would do breakfast. So like right in the other room with us is like they were giving them breakfast. So there was a lot of guys and families outside that were like, hi, we're filming. So we kind of like, we're respectful of each other. And like we gave a lot of our crafty to be able to support them in the morning. And it was very interesting to see how much the church had made an effort to change the energy of the space, because there was, so many years of negative things in that space. And then they were doing a lot of good there in the community and lots of cleansing of that space. And so it was interesting to be in there. We still like were very respectful when we used the Ouija board in that room. But it was interesting to be in a space that had such old energy, but that it did not feel malicious in any way at this point, that it felt like there was a lot of caring, and there was even us just kind of introducing ourselves to the space and kind of saying what our intent was with this film, and being respectful of how the space was being treated. And it was a pretty much all female, and a lot of Latinas, and like a lot of representation within the crew. So we were just incredibly aware of being respectful of that space, and we sort of got a very positive energy back throughout the night, which was great. Like when we were looking at the space ahead of time, I was kind of like, okay, how's this going to be? And I was really pleasantly surprised by the energy that we had in the space.
I love that. And you bring up a number of things that I'm just like, it's intuitive. And this is why I always tell people, I'm like, you don't need to run around and be like, I'm a psychic, I'm a medium, or whatever. It's like, you need to simply connect with yourself and say, how do you feel about these things?
Mm-hmm.
And it's exactly as you said. It's like you kind of went in and you're like, okay, I don't feel bad, though we're going to see how it goes. Mm-hmm. And the other things that you were doing, just like, I'm just going to check some boxes off real quick. So you introducing yourself to the space, so to speak, having other people involved in that process, basically saying, hey, we are here to do this. to connect with the houseless people that were also there, I think went a long way too, because it shows either the guardian of the space, which there are a lot of guardians for different things. It shows the guardian of the space that likely supports the feeding of these houseless people, that you mean them well, you mean the space well. And so that allows them to not be on guard and feel like they have to make things difficult, so to speak. And I love that you brought up the element of good deeds can be a cleanse in itself. How this place may have had more of a dark past, and I'm not entirely sure of all the history there, though, how helping other people and that kind of humanitarian aspect, that is a kind of cleansing in itself. And I think it's something that a lot of people don't think about, both on a personal level when they're thinking about trying to make their life better, but also on the level of space. Sure, we can, pull out incense and cleanse out a space and that kind of thing. But I also believe it is through action. It's through what you do. It's how you give back. That is how you can create energy of a space as well. So that's super cool that you bring that up. And I love that. I'm glad that I get to be like, yes, good, everybody. The other thing I'll point out too, and this has to do with the previous shoot that you were talking about. So it was something I saw. It was like one of the Conjuring movies. They did like a making of, and they talked about having a priest that come in, or two different priests who came in every week, and they cleansed out the space. And the way the priest described it was, spirit does not always understand the difference between imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. As a performer, you are there. It should not feel fake. It should feel very much like this is happening. And then, when you hear cut, you're like, all right. And you can kind of shed that skin and go about your life. So it's so good that they took those measures to cleanse out that space because it's true. I've known of people, especially if they're working in a haunted area or they're working in horror, and they start having weird things happen in their life. And it's not necessarily that they intended to call upon those things or they intended to be potentially followed home, but it has so much to do with the elements that are happening there. One, as a performer, to be like, okay, I'm not this person, but two, to feel safe in your environment, that so and so's not watching you, or gonna like follow you home on a spiritual level. Hopefully that doesn't happen on a physical level, but we're getting better about that. So these measures that you took on the set for Mikasa specifically, I think did a lot of good, just to be like, we mean well, we want to be careful. The Ouija board is a prop piece that's going to be safely kept with safe people who we know who are not going to do stupid things with it. And just being upfront from the beginning, it makes a huge difference. Such a huge difference. And now I think about Mikasa and just how much it's grown, and how, certainly it's a wonderful piece, though it's sometimes you need that kind of extra umph of energy wherever it may come from to kind of push something over the level and be like, okay, HBO, here's the thing. So while we're on the subject of Mikasa, I'll skip a question and then I'll kind of go back. Can you give a brief synopsis so that people watching can go over to HBO and watch it immediately? It's like 10 minutes. You got the time, but go. Anyway.
Yeah, so Mikasa is essentially about two Latina sisters who are deceased, living in their house, and there is a man that comes in, and they've had several people come through, and one of the sisters likes to mess with them. One of the sisters wants to just leave it alone. And this guy who's moving in brings in a Ouija board, and he wants to talk to them. And they've never had this experience before of somebody actually making the effort to connect with them. So it's essentially like a Ouija board experience from the ghost's perspective, or the spirit's perspective, and what it's like to be treated as a human, as a real person. And so for me, the original intent with this was more of a metaphor and more exploring, because you don't see a lot of Latina ghosts, like our history and our story. You see a lot of New England ghosts in media, and especially with things that are more horror driven or these kind of scary elements. Whereas in like the Latin culture, there's a much more positive relationship with death. You know, that there's a lot of, especially like in Mexico, the Dia de los Muertos, like there's a lot more love and respect in that. And you don't always see that in media unless it's something that is like specifically like Coco or these things that are really, you know, directly towards that. And so what we wanted to explore too is like these characters who are, they're it's meant to be like during the gold rush is essentially when they were living in like Southern California. And this idea of girls who were, you know, from a Mexican mother and a European father. So this idea for me, I'm also like combination Latina. So I'm like, you know, half Colombian, half German. Both of my actresses were, you know, half Latina, half something else, and often feeling like you don't fit in either world. And so it was sort of this metaphor of feeling invisible in some ways and feeling trapped between worlds and not quite seeing what your place is and people not quite seeing who you are. And so that kind of developed, you know, that kind of element of how it was seen. And it was based on a really lovely play, and we adapted it into this Latina element, and that story kind of built its way into it. But it was something that I was really passionate about being seen as a person, and especially like people who are, you know, Latinas or the Latin community, anyone who's being killed, especially at the border, like all these things, it ends up being numbers versus the person. And so that was something that we really wanted in this conversation of like, it's not just how I died, but of how I lived. And that was my big metaphor with it. And then in talking to you, it was like, oh, it's so nice that feels very genuine as much as we can to what the spirit experience is for you and a lot of the communication that you have. And so that felt like very nice. That it was like, I was really nervous for you to watch the film, and I was like, oh my God, I hope Rebekah's likes it. Like, I hope, you know, that it's respectful of this community that you know, talk to. And so I came into it more as the metaphor idea of it. And I think sometimes using what's considered as fantasy can sometimes be an easier way for people to digest ideas that are about humans. And so that was something that I was really passionate about. And it was, I didn't hear from you for a little while, and I was like scared. And then I like checked in, you're like, oh yeah, I've been really busy, but I really, you know, you liked it. I was like, oh thank God. Okay. I'm like, oh my God, if Rebekah doesn't like it, I'm going to be stressed. So
No, I felt bad about that. Yeah, that was a complete accident because like life kept happening, and for some reason I had put it in my mind. I was like, oh, that's gonna be like a 2-hour commitment. I have to be sure I have 2 hours uninterrupted. And then at some point I was like, oh, it's like 10 minutes. I can just watch this now. Like, what was I doing for like 3 months? I don't know. So there's my mind for you being like, okay, obstacles. I was like, wait.
right, we got this.
Yeah, I was so excited when you first told me about Casa, and you know, I was listening to the ghost element of it, of course, though, you know, I understood from the beginning the metaphor and the representation of it as well. And it just so happened as you kept talking about it, I was like, wait, this is great representation for adding humanity like to spirits as well. And I love what you're saying too about the representation of Latina spirits too, because you're absolutely right. When we think of ghost stories, it's you know, it's the white people, or unfortunately a lot of it has to do with BIPOC trauma. And your story was human. It's just human. And those are the kind of stories I know of the most. Those are the kinds of stories that I run into the most, where it's just so and so loves their house, or, you know, so and so likes their sister, and they just want to hang out. And then all of a sudden, somebody wants to talk to them. And if it's in a respectful way, and it's just a kind, courteous, and curious kind of way, oftentimes that is how you get communication. That is how you get these kinds of long-standing relationships, where it just kind of feels like, Oh yeah, I've got a roommate. They kind of hang out over in the kitchen most of the time, and sometimes we talk. And yeah, they don't really pay rent. They lived here like 50 years ago. They're cool, you know.
Yeah, yeah, that's very much, and it was so funny, like in trying to cast our lead guy, Frank, because also like he is same experience, so he is modern, but he is also, you know, half Latino, half I think he's a half Italian. So it's like these, you know, so he's coming into this space too, and it was so hard to like explain to guys that were like, you're not scared by this Ouija board working. You're curious and you're surprised that it's working, but like you just want to know. And so our idea for the longer format for this, hopefully into a series, would be that because he is a history teacher and like coming back to where he grew up, and so this idea of learning the real history of his community, of what really took place. So he comes at it from such a curious vibe, and we literally saw like 60 guys for this role, and he was just the best, and Greg is just great, and I think that that's what makes it so fun, you know, because it's we kind of say like a dark comedy, or it's kind of a dramedy, like there's some heart in it, but especially at the beginning it's very fun, it's very playful. It's not what you expect, and that was also very important, that the girls, the women, felt like real people. I didn't want to do any kind of, they have some like elements where they'll pop from one side of the room to the other, but overall they're in their clothes, they look like themselves, like they're themselves. And it's, you know, also in the wake of COVID, it was kind of this thing of like, oh, we're starting to understand what it's like to be trapped with your family for several months in a house, and how stressful that could be. Like, can you now imagine being trapped in a house with your sibling for 100 years and see how crabby you might be? And so it's definitely like sells it a little bit like a rom-com, but it's really about sisters, it's about family, and it's about like, especially in like Latina culture, if you're at each other's throats, then you find a way to come back to the family element of it. And you're like, there's a lot of love under there, even if you don't always get along, you know, really seeing what that connection is was a big part of this too. And like, because the sisters are so different, of kind of bringing them back to what their humanity is and what it means to really support each other, was a big part. But yeah, and then Frank is just like down to have roommates. Like he's fine. He's like, can we just like talk about like turning the lights on and off? Like it's a lot for the, you know, I got to pay the light bills. Like, can we maybe work together? You know, and so he comes at it in a very collaborative place. And so yeah, like having now talked to you, or like been to your house, and like how you interact with spirit, I'm like, oh, great. Like we just went along the same path of like, oh, what an idea. We just respect and share space and like talk about consent and sharing, and it's universal. What a concept.
Yeah, you hit on some things I talk about a lot, one of which is spiritual compromise, which can be as small as, could you not leave the lights on? I have to pay the light bill. It's not always, oh, I gotta kick you out because you put the lights on. No, it can just be like, hey, could you not? Thanks. Just
like flicker them on and off. It's a lot. Like,
yeah. It's like, hey, you keep doing that, the bulb's gonna burst. Okay, thank you. Yeah, all right. Like stuff like that. You hit on spiritual compromise. You talked about curiosity over fear, and that's what I talk about a lot too. It, as far as spiritualism goes, if it comes from a place of fear, then is it needed? You know, these are all personal journeys that we're creating. We never have to do pedal to the metal or anything like that. So whether that's connecting with yourself, or that's connecting to other spiritual activities, spirits outside of you, curiosity, because curiosity doesn't create this atmosphere of, you know, getting it right, or, oh, but what if this happens, or bad spirits. That's a lot of fear. That's a lot of anxiety. That's a lot of nerves. Whereas this curiosity element, and that's why I love Casa so much, because it's just like, he rolls out and he's like, all right, I know you're here. This might work. Let's try it, you know? And I love that.
Yeah, I know, like that. I know there's a lot of strong opinions about Ouija boards, but yeah, I think that the goal for him is like, okay, I know you're all here. Can I talk to you through this? Like, what's the best way to communicate? And they're like, oh my God, it worked. You know, I think he has a line. He's like, I got this at Target. I don't know how it like worked. and so, but yeah, it's this very honest attempt at communication and not really sure how, but like, I'm here, I know you're here, would this work for us to talk? And so there's like an excitement for him to be able to do that, but then yeah, there's a push pull between the sisters of, do we want to talk to him? Like one of them is like, no, don't talk to him. And so that becomes kind of a joke in how the Ouija board moves, because they're sort of arguing whether or not they should actually answer the questions. And it gets, yeah, that ends up him thinking her name is Gur because the other sister stops it. So it's like a little, comedy elements to this, different perspectives, again, because not all spirits are the same, that they have different dynamics. And one of the sisters very clearly from the beginning is just like, I just want to be left alone. Like, I don't want to engage with anybody. I don't want to bother anybody. Like, I don't really know why I'm here. And I just don't want to mess anything up. And whereas the other sister is like, let's mess it up. Like, let's do some stuff. Like, let's, she's knocking things over. She's trying to be as involved as she can. And it meant a lot for her that somebody actually wants to talk to her and is not just running away. So yeah.
You bring up another good point. Some people are like, end all be all, they're like, oh, they're trying to say something, or like, oh, they have two different personalities, or oh, they must be telling the truth. And it's like, people don't always tell the truth. And yeah, what if there are two people manipulating the thing? And there's just so many considerations to be made. And I love that you create this wonderful visual adaptation and representation for anybody to see and be like, oh, okay, that could be how it is. And in my opinion, that is how it is. All of this intuition, to bring it back and to kind of conclude on it, all of the intuition that you used and that I feel like your crew used and that your performers used, everybody involved in the process, it comes to show that we all have intuition. You don't always have to pull in the priest, pull in the medium, pull in the shaman. It's a matter of saying, all right, once again, does this feel right with me? Does it feel right with everybody else? How are we feeling today? Is this good with everybody? It just shows how well anybody can do little things that make a big difference when it comes to, I would say, not only spiritual representation, but also the representation that you have in this film for the Latinx community as well. So super cool. I have one last question for you, because we have a bunch of Molli fans and people come to Wilmington to connect with her.
Aww.
Like, I don't know if anybody really knew about her. I knew the baristas had an idea that she was around. And then I was like, hey, I did this thing where I was like, I don't usually do this, but I had a friend who worked behind the bar, and I was like, so if I were to say there was like a woman who was here and she's a sex worker from like the early 1800s, what would you say? And she was like, that's who it is. And I was like, oh God. That's all. I'm not that person that like approaches people in grocery stores to be like, so your grandmother. No, that's
the medium. Yeah,
no, I feel like it's not consensual. That's my personal belief, to be like, this
thing at you that you're not ready for.
Right. So with that in mind, and Molli being far more famous than I am, I think people, they would rather watch Molli. I mean, I would too, but I'm just a form of her, a representation of her until further notice. So with your experience with me at 24, and then we took a walk around town and Molli just kind of followed around, what was that like for you?
It was so lovely, honestly. It was like really interesting because I think I didn't ask you at first. Like, we had sat and talked and stuff, and then as we were walking, and I was like, yeah, you had said that Molli goes to that coffee shop a lot, and you're like, oh yeah, she's with us. And I was like, oh shit, okay, hi. And it was very cool to get to talk to her because yeah, it was funny again, like, it's hard enough to explain my job to people today, and then it was very entertaining to have that kind of talk through with her about like her being like, so what is this, like, what are you doing, and that you're not actually having sex. And yeah, that she said I was like a madam, and I was like, hell yeah, like that totally makes sense. And it's so interesting because I do know a lot of sex workers and people that work in the adult industry, and I'm very passionate about their respect and the like what they do, and not, I don't ever look down on any of those elements, and I'm like love to help empower that. So I love that so many people are gravitating to her as well. And so it was really interesting to hear about her experiences, and it was like nice to hear that she said that she felt like she was more empowered at that time than I would anticipate for that time period. And it was also just funny, like at one point we dropped by the post office because you had so much mail from like your fans, and she was like, all right, what do we got, you know, like. And so it was just so funny to like be in a day in the life with you of like what's it like just walking around. And like we went by like the train, what was that, the
Museum.
yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, just having her responses to it, and it was like just so lovely. Like the energy was just so nice, and it just felt like that was your friend, that like she's just hanging out and she was just curious. And then at one point she's like, all right, bye. Like that was it. You know, it was like, cool, got other stuff to do. Like I get it. So that was really cool.
Yeah, and that's okay. So a few notes on that. One, that's not a every week thing that I get that much mail. That was around the time of the live with Molly for Valentine's Day, where I went live for like an hour and a half and I just opened up things that were for her, which I have all of them out here. She has more stuff than I've ever gotten, which I'm fine with, you know. What I love about her is just like her curiosity with all of this. And I love that it actually eventually turned into a skit and that we were able to have this conversation because she was so curious. And it really made me think like, okay, a lot of people aren't aware of these things. I think a lot of people may see the Me Too movement as something in the past. And I know a lot of people, especially right now with a lot of legislation going on, a lot of women and women identifying people feel like they don't have a voice right now. And I think that makes your career even more important because it reminds us the Me Too movement did happen. It reminds us that there are things that are moving forward. It's a matter of looking at the things that have moved forward and then say, all right, we want those things. We're going to keep working and fighting for those things because it's possible. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. People with uteruses are still actively fighting to be able to control their own bodies and having the support to just live their own lives, you know. And that is, Me Too was a great start to that conversation, but it is continuous, and it is getting even scarier right now. And so, the more that we can do to support each other in this fight, and to, again, register to vote, get your votes out there. And especially, when we, those of us in the South, like it's in these battleground states, like it is so important. I mean, in Georgia, we had a big deal last election. And so it was like down to the so we're in our county going like, wow, every vote is really important. And so that's something that I don't take lightly. And I think, consent is really important through the work that I do, through spiritual work, through work with actors, and then continued work with just legislation and how we treat our own bodies. Like if we should have the freedom to do what we want with our own bodies. And there's so many people that are fighting a really incredible fight right now. And I am really proud to be part of that community, especially here in Georgia. But it's ongoing, and to see what Molly's experiences were at that time, and in ways some things are not that different, which is terrifying. And hopefully we can make some adjustments so that we're not reliving that time.
Mm-hmm. And if it's any kind of perspective, I explained those things to Molly when they happened. She was appalled. She was like, who's making that decision for women? Because she was just like, that was never something anybody talked about when she was alive. She was very much like, no, she talked about going to, and I have another video live with Molly talking about things that she would take either in tea or she would just swallow as a form of contraceptives and that kind of thing. And she was just like, nah, men did not get involved unless it was their fault and they had to pay for it. That was the code of honor in that, if they could track it. So Molly's all for people standing up for their bodies.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, for anybody out there who needed to know her opinion, which I don't think is a surprise.
Always pro-choice.
Yeah. Yeah, I won't go into all the details of that. However, I just kind of going back to something else you said with sometimes it's easier to believe something if it comes from fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I always say on my channel, believe or don't believe, I hope you like my stories.
Yeah.
And that's it. Belief is always going to be personal. I'm not going to sit here and be like, everybody has to. No, it's a matter of if they see my work, if they see your work, and let's say that this person doesn't believe in ghosts at all, and let's say they find themselves in a situation where they're having experiences that they can't explain, I hope that they see work like Casa, that they see TikToks like mine, and they're like, you know what? One time I saw this story. I didn't think it was true, but they did this thing and they were chill about it and they were fine about, I'm just going to try it.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, that curiosity rather than it coming from fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, the original point of the film was to respect people who are living that are different from you, and that carrying over into the same treatment and respect for spirits as well. That that was the big metaphor for me, and to see that it can be hopefully both appreciated for how you treat your siblings in the world that are alive, and then how we treat people who are spirits, like the energies around us are both really important.
Sure. Well, on that note of connection, where can people find you? Can they follow you somewhere? Can they keep up with what you're doing? What is going on that you can tell us about anyway?
Yes, you can follow me on the Instagrams. I'm at Kristina.Arjona. I don't know if we need to write it out, but it's Kristina with a K, so Kristina .Arjona. The J throws people off. But that's on Instagram, and then I'm at atlintimacycoordinator.com. You can watch Casa at HBO Max anytime for the next 5 years. So watch it, like it, I think you can comment, rate it, you can rate it and stuff. And so please watch it and share with your friends. And I hope that it's, supportive of both of the elements, all the elements that we're trying to get across. And you can definitely, if you're interested in any of this stuff, you can always DM me on Instagram, and I'm happy to talk about it. I do a lot of panels and stuff. I'm gonna start putting them actually on my website, so they're more accessible. But yeah, I'm getting better at my social media. You are great, and I'm like, yes, I will do these things.
Well, awesome. Well, I certainly appreciate you taking the time to speak with me again and to speak to the followers, and for anybody who just may come by and see this on TikTok and or YouTube. It has just been so great to connect with you, and I wish you the best. I'm putting all the good vibes towards Casa becoming its own series. I really want that to happen because we need, as you said, all that kind of representation. It represents so much. And I want to see that on more regular TV screens, or maybe even like a big screen or something like that. Whatever's meant to happen, I hope it just keeps happening in a good way,
Hey, yes, that's something. It's hard to make content for Latin focused content. So yes, any support that we get, any voices that we get, it all helps. So yay, thank you for the energy.
All right. Well, thank you. And I will end this call now, or at least end the recording.